morning, everyone, and welcome to our live session this morning. We have an enormous pleasure to welcome someone that I've known for quite a few years. I think, Dorothy, I may have met you maybe about 10 years ago, maybe even longer than that.
Yes.
So Dorothy's a very interesting person, in fact, fascinating, and she will tell us a bit more about her background, but I guess nowadays you would describe yourself, Dorothy, as a Swahili interpreter and translator. Is that the best way to describe your profession right now?
Yes, community interpreter, yes.
Right. So you'd work a lot with people in the community in all kinds of settings, including mental health, domestic violence, health, generally speaking, courts, police,
Yes.
all of that.
Yes.
And your language pairs are Swahili and English.
Correct.
And how did it all start? Tell us a bit more about how you ended up learning the language and what happened. What is it now? Maybe about 30 years ago, 40 years ago?
Yes, 1974, when I was very young, my husband and I, with two small children, at that time we had a third child later on, we went to work in Tanzania with a Christian mission, and we went to work with the Anglican Church of Tanzania. It's quite a large church, and we went to work in a theological college. My husband was teaching, and I was a medical doctor in the college, as well as doing teaching, driving Land Rovers, teaching children, homeschooling, you name it. there were all sorts of activities that we were doing. So Swahili was widely known in Tanzania. It was the national language, and we went for 3 months initially to a language school to learn Swahili, and then we learnt more as we worked and lived in the community.
That's really fascinating in that I heard you say just before that Swahili is one of the easiest languages to learn for an English speaker. You said in top 5. But where is it spoken, and roughly how many people speak it?
Well, I've seen the number of 80 million, but it could be more. So it's widely spoken. It's the lingua franca in Tanzania. So all the Tanzanians speak good Swahili, except very old ladies and old men. In Kenya, people speak Swahili and understand Swahili, and also to a lesser extent in Uganda, a little bit in Rwanda, and then a big swathe of Eastern Congo. So Congo is a very big country, and it borders on Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi in the east, and a large swathe of Congolese in that area speak Swahili.
Okay, so what you describe indicates to me that there are probably regional variations of Swahili. It's not a homogeneous language that's spoken the same way. So a bit like, I guess, English, where it's a little bit different to, the Australian English, a bit different to American English. Is it similar?
Yes, the saying has been that Swahili was born in Tanzania, and it got sick in Kenya, and died in the Congo.
Okay.
So that gives you some idea of the accuracy and the standards of Swahili. Tanzanian Swahili is what we call the standard Swahili. So you might say like BBC English or something like that. And then the Kenyan Swahili is a bit not quite so grammatical, not quite such a good wide vocabulary perhaps. And the Congolese Swahili is a degree more different, with grammatical differences, vocabulary, lexical differences. So yes, there's a bit of difference there.
And is it a challenge? Because fast forward, a couple of decades, let's put it that way. You've returned to Australia after working there for a few decades. And how long have you been back, firstly?
We've been back now, so we finished with the mission in 2008, early 2008. Yeah, so we've been back now 12 years.
So is that a challenge, the variations of the Swahili spoken here in Australia when you work as an interpreter for you? Or have you been able to incorporate that into your daily practice, and you're pretty confident no matter where a person comes from and what variety of Swahili they speak?
It's been a learning curve because there are quite a few differences between the Congolese Swahili and the standard Swahili. So it's been a learning curve, learning differences in vocabulary, keeping some glossaries so that I know what I'm talking about with the differences. People understand me when I say to the Congolese, "Are you following me?" They say, "Oh, we follow you very well. You speak very good Swahili," they say. "You speak Tanzanian Swahili." And then, so that's why, you know, I need the visual cues to actually speak with people. I need to clarify sometimes, and I need to use maybe for the same thing, I might need to use the standard Swahili and the Congolese Swahili so that I know that I'm getting the message across.
Okay. And of course, the language part of interpreting is just one challenge. And compared to other things, it's probably a minor challenge because that's something you can, as you said, practice and prepare. But now, you know, particularly in Melbourne, where we are in lockdown and we can't really go out unless, you know, it's an essential requirement. There are many other challenges. So, for example, interpreting via video. I heard you say just before that you do a lot of translation now. Can you tell me and our listeners what other challenges you encounter in your profession? So, starting from 2008, when you returned, firstly, why did you get into this profession? Because it is something, I guess, new, having been a doctor and, you know, returning home. What motivated you? What drove you to become interpreter and translator in the Swahili language? And fast forward to now, what are some of the challenges that you encountered?
The getting into it was interesting because when my husband and I came back to Australia, it was I didn't want to go back to medicine. I had retired at that point from after 40 years of being a medical practitioner. So I'm thinking, what do I do now, you know, for the rest of my life? I'm not brain dead. I could do something. So, you know, I thought about some sort of work maybe with refugees, maybe teaching English. And then I met another returned missionary from another completely different country. And she said to me, "Oh, I hear Centrelink is looking for Swahili interpreters." And she gave me some contacts and some numbers. So eventually I did call, and I was called in for an interview, and I became an interpreter for Centrelink. And then I realized that you needed to do an exam, and she hadn't told me about that. She'd been interpreting for many, many years and had never done an exam. So then I set about doing the exam, got NAATI accredited level 2, which is the highest you can go for Swahili. And then the doors opened to all the agencies. And,
right.
And so that's how I became a community interpreter.
And then translation, did that arrived on your doorstep accidentally? What happened? Well,
initially I didn't apply for accreditation with translation because I wanted to go and meet people. I didn't want to be sitting at home with the computer. I wanted to go out and interpret in person, on-site interpreting. So, but the translation has come from time to time, you know, even for Polaron and for some of the other agencies. WITS wanted me to do more and more translation, and I just said, no, it's a bit hard, and I have to work hard at it, and I have to sit at the computer. Lately with the lockdown, somehow some of the agencies that I'd never heard of, some of them have got onto me somehow through NAATI, I think, through the NAATI website, and have asked me to do translation or checking of translation. So I'm happy to do that.
Sounds like you've been pretty busy. Could you tell us a bit more about who you're interpreting for? Because one of the things that I know about your language pair is that there are many refugees in Australia that speak Swahili. And I think some of them haven't been in Australia too long. They may not be familiar with our systems or, you know, culture even, I would say. So the role of the interpreter, I guess it's more than a linguist. It's also to bridge those gaps in understanding of how the systems work here. So tell us, who do you interpret for, and what are some of the challenges in those settings?
The majority of the non-English speakers that I'm interpreting for are Congolese. So the eastern part of the Congo, which is that big swathe of Swahili-speaking territory, has been very disrupted over the last 30 years since the Rwandan genocide, but even from before. So people have fled into the neighboring countries. They've sat in refugee camps. Some of the people I've seen in this last year have been 24 years in a refugee camp. Wow. So they've sat there in a refugee camp, perhaps in Tanzania, perhaps in Malawi, in surrounding countries there, and have applied for visas with the UNHCR and eventually have been brought to Australia. So they're Congolese with their slightly different Swahili, not much education. Some of the women are not literate. They've got lots of children. They have lots of children when they're here. One lady had 8 children in the refugee camp. Wow. Because she was there for 20 years. And so they've had very disrupted and often traumatic lives as well. The challenge is the language with them, I think. I mean, one, as an interpreter, you're not really a cultural bridge as such. Right. You sort of are a bit, but you probably under the OSIT ethics, the code of ethics, we're not meant to be cultural bridges with the professionals, but sometimes that can naturally come about. People, the dietitians asking the Africans, what do they eat, and they eat quite differently from how Anglos would eat or Europeans would eat. Yes, so sometimes there's the opportunity to explain about that.
Mm-hmm. And one of the interesting things you have just mentioned is that there are in some sections of the community, the literacy levels are really low. So I wonder, for example, with translation services, whether they're always properly targeted at the community. That's been my bugbear for a long time, that we produce translations that people won't be able to read. And I think therefore the role of the interpreter is so key.
Yes.
Because that's especially face-to-face. So when you now have to work by video, and I know you don't do phone interpreting, but before we came on air, we were chatting about the future of interpreting, I guess, and we were saying, I wonder whether this is going to stay online forever. And we both agreed that hopefully not, because there's room for face-to-face interpreting. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, well, with the translation issue, lately I've been given jobs by a translating agency. I'd not heard of them before or done work for them before, and they wanted me to check translation, which somebody else had done. Obviously, I thought somebody who was not quite speaking standard Swahili. So my job was to check the translation and to make alterations. And then I'm thinking, who's going to be reading this? Are the Swahili speakers, how are they going to get this information? I mean, I don't know, and that's come out in the radio and the television lately. Are they plugged into social media? Are they plugged into, watching ABC News, where we are getting, so much of our information? So, I was just wondering how is this going to be used? So I don't know, but I think, and I did write recently to OSIT and say, I think we ought to be talking to the Victorian government about, how interpreters could be used more in the settings at the moment, with the spread of the virus in Victoria.
Yes, sorry, Dorothy. I think what you're describing is a system that's a little bit broken, but particularly now we're seeing cracks in communication essentially. And I think what you've described there is perhaps a little bit of box ticking, a little bit of lack of engagement, and really understanding the community. Because what you told us about the Swahili speaking community, for example, that it's pretty diverse. It might not be high in numbers, but because there's low literacy levels, and there are potentially people that aren't as engaged because they may have low levels of education, you really cannot do translations for them, the old school way. And that is also because we don't communicate the same way as we used to. So, I don't know about you, I can see many, many books in your background, but I don't read as much, for example. I tend to nowadays, first of all, be selective about the information because there's so much coming at us, right?
Yes.
But secondly, chunks. I will watch more videos, and I will read shorter articles. So I think we need to think about our communities in the same way that, translating, 20 pages of something, putting it on a government's website, it's just not going to do the job. And I think we are learning that. I mean, we knew this all along, but it's just that people didn't want to listen. So I think now that we can see immediate and very risky health outcomes for people, and there's a lot of backlash about what communities know, what they don't know, where are they accessing information. The key to it is to, I think, really go to the community and try and understand them. What are their needs? How do they communicate? Who are they?
Yes.
And we try to look up, Swahili speaking community. Guess what? There's really no information about them in Australia. So it's all fragmented and, quite difficult to find.
Yes.
So I think where I'm going with this is to really emphasize the role of interpreters, not as cultural bridges, but as people who know how to deal with information that's complex sometimes, or is linguistically challenging, but also culturally challenging. So would you tell us just a bit more about how that plays out in your daily life?
Yeah, can you just, I'm not quite sure that I'm getting the question.
Sure. Should have been clearer. So what I'm asking is what are some of the strategies that you use, for example, when you have to work on video now, or do translations to ensure that the messages that the governments, let's say, want to provide to the community are better crafted, or are more tailor-made, or focused on community need rather than what we think they might need?
Yeah, well, I think for me to connect with Swahili-speaking communities, I don't, because I'm not African. I'm not. That's not my job, to be part of their communities. I mean, I have met community leaders in my work, and there are small community groups, like there might be groups of Burundians, there might be groups of Congolese who come from a particular village and a particular language group because remember, these African countries are often multilingual. So Congo, for example, has 400 languages.
Wow.
As well as it has 400 tribal languages, if you like. So sometimes there's little groups that are tied up into these, maybe they all came from the same area, or they're the same. They're Burundians, for example. There are some Burundians, quite a lot, who speak Swahili as well. So I think the government's job is to, maybe through Multicultural Victoria, is to connect with those community leaders, because I think that's the way to get the message across, any sort of message across to those people. Because I think we're both agreeing that I think if you translate stuff and put it on some website, there's not going to be a lot of access to that. People sometimes, the older people, the parents, don't know how to use a computer. They're not computer literate. Some of them are, but a lot of them aren't. The kids might be, because the kids are going to school, but the kids aren't interested perhaps in talking to their parents, telling their parents things. Even speaking Swahili, the kids aren't interested in keeping their language up.
So it's
Yeah.
really no different than many other communities in Australia. It's just that it's perhaps a little bit more diverse, and Swahili being the lingua franca, I guess, is not always the first language. And although your clients might speak a number of different languages, you
Yes,
don't speak a
yes.
common language as a native language, which comes with its own set of challenges, doesn't it?
Yes. I mean, I sometimes say to people, what's the language you're speaking at home? And it might be Swahili, but it might be Kibemba or, one of these other tribal languages. But I think getting back to the challenges of any interpreting job, I think is knowing what you're going into, what's the briefing about this job, what's the vocabulary that I might be needing to use. So yes, I always try and prepare and try and somehow get a briefing. If I haven't been given one, which is often the case, I might ring up the professional and get some more background and just do that homework before the job happens. And
Right,
I find that very helpful and useful
right.
on the whole.
Right. And I think you are very well respected interpreter, and I think you're assertive enough to ask for that. But not everyone is. So it's really, really important to brief the interpreter, because otherwise you have no idea what you're walking into. And some of the interpreting situations are pretty challenging by their own nature, I guess, because we already mentioned courts and domestic violence situations, police interviews, all kinds of things that you might not be prepared for as an interpreter, because you come with the linguistic skills and your training and your accreditation or certification, as it's called now, but nothing prepares you for what happens on the day, right?
That's right. I can remember going to a psychiatric ward in a well-known hospital with no briefing. So I went there and I said to the doctor, when the doctor came along, I said, can you tell me what it's about? And she said, oh no, we never tell people, So I mean, I didn't know if it was, schizophrenia or what it might be. And I said, well, it would really help me to have a briefing. She said, oh, none of the other interpreters I've had have ever asked for a briefing. So I just quickly, out of the top of my head, I said, well, they can't have been very professional, I said.
And it's true.
Yeah. So, I mean, I needed to know what all this was about, because particularly in a mental health setting, in any setting, you need to know what you're going to be meeting, I think, because you do a much better job then.
Right. And there are also, of course, safety concerns for interpreters in situations like that. So you did mention that you don't consider yourself part of the African community because you're kind of an outsider, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yes.
But in settings such as mental health or police, there's quite a lot of risk that needs to be managed. But it's not just what happens on the day. If you don't get briefed and also debriefed in some of the situations, and people that you work with have gone through massive trauma and it's really, really important to look after your own mental health as an interpreter.
Yes.
Could you maybe share some strategies around that? What do you do? How do you cope with that?
It hasn't happened so very often that I've found myself coming home and thinking, I'm really stressed about this case. I need some help. I remember I had a series of jobs at Monash Medical Centre a couple of 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. Every day they wanted me to come to deal with this very sick child and the family. And it was very challenging, just the sickness of the child and the difficulty of the parents to accept the situation. And I remember going to the social work department after I'd finished one of the sessions and said, can I, because there had been a social worker involved with the case, can I speak with a social worker? Because I was just feeling, upset about this continual interaction day after day after day. I mean, driving from my home to Monash was work, and finding the parking and dealing with so something like that. You look for somebody to debrief you. You can debrief with your colleagues. I think that doesn't break confidentiality.
Right. You don't have to give names.
Friends. Yeah, I have a very close friend who's also an interpreter that we get together and we can debrief, and that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I have debriefed online with that e-bulletin that Ozit had at some point. I mean, it doesn't happen very often, but yes, sometimes you might need to withdraw from something because you've just got too involved.
Right, or if you feel too overwhelmed. And of course, we've got quite a few questions which I'll ask Andrea to put to you or me in a moment. But I wanted to ask you, being a medical doctor, even though you did say you retired, do you sometimes feel like, intervening or interfering with, or do you always have this professional hat on where I'm just an interpreter, or do you want to just jump out of your skin at times?
Definitely, so there's the mama at the hospital having her 9th baby when she doesn't really need any more, and I sort of want to say, please, give her the pill or do something. But
you can't.
Yeah, well, then sometimes I say, because I do chat to people, I say to the dad, oh, is this the last one? And Dad would say, oh, God knows, Mungu anajua, that sort of thing. And you say, well, that it's sensible sometimes to have fewer and it's less expensive. And yes, but there's, it's a cultural thing. So
right. And you can't go over certain boundaries.
So no, I don't. I try and keep it separate. But of course, having a medical background is just very, very helpful in clinical settings. Where there's diseases that of course I know a lot about some of them.
Now, look, we're lucky, very, very, very lucky to have you with us here today, because I think it's given us a really nice, it's opened a window to your world, but also to the world of interpreters and some of the challenges that are the same across all languages. It doesn't matter what cultures or what languages we do interpreting in, the issues are still the same, that we don't want interpreting to be transactional. We want interpreting to be a facilitation of communication process where people come out with better outcomes than what they've started with. And that sometimes is difficult because people are busy, they don't really understand what we do. But of course, the other thing is that there's such a variety of approaches to interpreting. So what you've said about wanting to be briefed and the doctor saying, well, no one's ever asked me before, that's a worry, because that should happen, particularly in some settings like that.
Yes.
So we're very grateful for you being part of this morning, because I think it's really opened our thinking up. Andrea, do we have any questions for Dorothy?
Yes, we do. There's a question for both. Do you guys think interpreters in Australia are being used as much as it should be during this time of COVID-19?
I don't think so. It relates to perhaps what I said about my recent request or letter to Ozit to get in touch with the government. I mean, even our union that so many of us have joined, Professionals Australia, get in touch with the government and say, why aren't they using professional interpreters? There should be more use in this difficult time that we're going through at the moment.
And we do have the technology to do it. It's just, I think what I find is the lack of coordination, actually, or because there have been efforts for the last, I don't know how many years, at least 20 that I can think of going online and having, a system where, particularly in emergency situations or, when travel's an issue or distance an issue, to have video interpreters. And that's a challenge in itself. But I think, when COVID happened, a lot of things that were systemic issues exacerbated. That's my opinion, because we are seeing, we're not seeing improvement. We're seeing lack of coordinations and interpreters sort of being disconnected from people that they normally work with. I think there was something like 95% reduction of face-to-face interpreting in Australia, well, certainly in Victoria. So that tells you a lot about what's happening and how multicultural communities are potentially being, kept out of the loop. And definitely, we all have ability to do video interpreting, so that for the time being, that is a really good way of working, and that's the only way of working for a lot of us. So.
Yeah.
Thank
all
you.
right.
Yes, that takes me to the following question. How do you think the interpreting industry will look like with this new reality, let's say in the next 2 to 3 years?
Do you want to have a go, Dorothy?
Yeah, well, I think it will. I think it will change. I think just like workplaces will change, people will be working from home a lot more, and I think interpreters will probably be working from home a lot more. So a lot of the hospitals now, the Royal Melbourne got onto telehealth early last year through all graduates. The Royal Children's Hospital is now upping its telehealth. They're the places that I work mostly, so they're getting onto telehealth. TIS is getting onto telehealth. So I think there will be the use of the telehealth and you know, Zoom and video stuff a lot more. I think there'll still be room for on-site interpreting. Imagine in a court, for example, I think you will need to have on-site interpreting in court.
And I agree. I agree with all that, and I think the face of interpreting will potentially change faster than what it had been, because I think everybody knows, and we've known for a long time, that we should be using telehealth and video more. But there was just, you know, I don't know whether you can call it resistance necessarily, but there was no impetus, there was no prompt really to get it right. And I think video interpreting is very taxing, actually, because if you think about it, you focus on a screen, which makes you tired. So, you know, we can't be expected, for example, to sit there for 8 hours a day and do interpreting and, you know, sort of make it a transactional exchange. But that is where it's heading with some of the providers, or some of the expectations of interpreters, which we kind of need to resist a little, because I think there's still room for face-to-face interpreting in difficult situations. So in things like, you know, palliative care or mental health, where, you know,
domestic violence.
Right, another one. Where look, yes, we can do video, yes, we can do phone, but should we, is the question. So I think the face of interpreting is changing, will change further, but I'm hoping that face-to-face you know, exchange can still remain part of the profession for the more difficult or necessary situations. But we do need to get with it, and I think one of the challenges has been to make sure that you've got your systems at home, that you have internet that's fast enough, that you have headphones, that you press the button and you work. So there's all kinds of things like that to do with technology. And also training and support of each other. And you know, I think that's the other aspect of it all, where, you know, I would like to see less transactional. We don't do a lot of interpreting, by the way, but whatever we do, we try and, you know, certainly give interpreters enough information to be able to prepare for the session, you know, give them breaks, which are necessary, otherwise you get too tired and just worn out by it all. And also debriefing for the more challenging situations where you've seen or heard or been part of something that, you know, can really contribute to burnout and you know, just exhaustion, really, sometimes.
Yes.
So I think we'll see some changes, but hopefully we can retain the human factor as much as we can. And, you know, I think some of what's happened, as unfortunate it has been with the COVID, has uncovered lots of systemic cracks in the system. And I'm hoping that governments are listening and, you know, allocating, for example, money to the right things. So I think personally, we'd be much better off giving money to interpreters than translating something that no one's going to read, you know, because they can't. Any other questions, Andrea?
No, thank you. There's no more questions.
Okay, so let me just thank Dorothy very much. I think it's been fascinating. I really, on a personal level and professional level, I wanted to thank you for being part of it and opening that window to your world, to your life, and as an interpreter. I wanted to hand over to you for the last few words, but from me, sincere thanks, and it's been wonderful to hear from you and see you on the screen.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, and yes, since I've known you, it's been great to have you as a role model and to work for Polaron from time to time. But yes, so just thank you for having me, and I'll continue to keep working. That's one of the issues when you're getting older. You keep thinking, well, you know, how long do I keep going in this job? And when you read books about aging, one of the things they say is never retire. So there you are. So we'll just see how I'm going with that. But I'm certainly part of the workforce. I wouldn't say I was in demand, but there is plenty of work for me. I'm not short of work, and I'm happy to keep working.
Dorothy, as far as a life plan, and that is never retiring, I'm with you. I plan to work until I'm at least 97. So,
I'll join you.
Right. So people have to put up with us for much, much longer.
Yes.
But thank you very much for this morning, and it's been fantastic. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Andrea. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye.